Our next panel is about building resilience in cyberspace. What are the practitioners missing the most? So basically here we are going to focus on the different lessons learned from current capacity building projects and also the practitioners' experience on the ground and the particular needs that they have in terms of conducting different projects. So I'm very happy to welcome here, physically here in Tallinn, Ms. Liina Areng, project partner leader in Cyber for Development. Yes, and online we have two gentlemen. I will start with Mr. Matteo Lucchetti, Program Manager for Cybercrime Program Office, Council of Europe. And then also we have here with us Mr. Klée, Aiken, Principal Pacific Partnership Advisor from CERT, New Zealand. So yes, I mean, ladies first. Liina, what it takes to have a successful project and what should be avoided at all costs? I mean, you've been participating in the Cyber for Dev for some years now, and you have visited many exotic countries and have very exotic experience also from capacity building initiatives.
Thank you very much, Uku. And first of all, I'm delighted to be here in this physical space, talking to a physical moderator, but still missing good colleagues, Matteo and Klée. So hopefully we'll meet physically next time somewhere. Yes, what it takes to have a successful capacity building project. First of all, it starts with a dedicated team that knows their mission and have the right expertise to implement the project. Before you take any action on the ground or virtually, as these days is more common, you have to find out who are the other implementers who have done similar activities and projects previously in this region or elsewhere. And you have to talk to them because the worst that can happen is that a receiving country is overwhelmed with different short-term implementers walking in and out and delivering different, quite similar assessments, but not a practical, tangible outcome. And as we like to talk in our Cyber for Dev project, we like to talk about absorption capacity. That every country, be it large or small, has a limited absorption capacity, capacity to receive assistance or absorb knowledge. And we have had a few cases where a recipient country is very straightforwardly and honestly telling us that we don't need this fourth or fifth maturity assessment because we have had quite a few already the past six months. So please deliver something practical. And this is indeed something that we should strive towards to balance project planning with practical actions. So we need to be all more open, I guess, as projects, more collaborative, and also be very flexible because circumstances change, needs change, things happen. I mean, political change, hurricane comes, corona comes, so you need to be very adaptable to the changes. And exactly collaborate with people already operating on the ground. So, for example, we have a very good working relationship with the Organization of American States, and who have good knowledge about the region and about the countries. They know what is needed, what works there, what doesn't work there, and we are very happy to to conduct joint trainings with them and to build on their work and to link our activities with a longer-term vision and strategy on how to upscale capacities and cooperation in the region. And also, what should be avoided at all costs is if you deliver something that is not really needed, that is not theirs, that is not accepted in a way that doesn't create a local buy-in. If you're simply ignorant to local cultural, historic, economic, or social realities. What you need to focus on is that the recipient country would take would feel that that they are the main driver or a very important part of that collective brain that delivers this outcome, be it a national cybersecurity strategy or a national cybersecurity exercise or cyber awareness campaign.
Yes, Klée, I saw you nodding quite a lot, and I mean, just wanted to ask from you as well. Maybe you have some colorful story to tell about the lessons learned with a successful project. I understood that before you joined to CERT New Zealand, you were in charge of several projects in different countries. So maybe you have something to share about the lessons learned and to illustrate a bit further what Liina just told us.
Kia ora, everyone. Hello from Wellington. Yes, I was nodding quite a bit, and I was a bit worried. I think you've chosen three folks that are probably quite like-minded in our approach and the lessons that we've learned. Thanks for the opportunity to jump in as well. Yes, there are a lot of challenges that we face, and I'll start with what to avoid, because this is something that we've seen quite a bit in our experience, both my experience at CERT NZ working with the Pacific, but also in my previous life working more across the Asia Pacific on cyber capacity building. And what you really need to avoid when entering a new cyber capacity building project is showing up with solutions. I know that sounds pretty counterintuitive, but if you approach a project and you arrive with a pre-baked solution, a predefined solution, or a prescribed solution, it generally isn't going to work. And that really kind of echoes what the colleague from Cyber for Dev was sharing as well. Oftentimes, folks with really strong experience on cyber issues in their home countries or in different projects try to transplant solutions that may work in one place. But because we need to take a much more holistic and tailored view to the context in which projects are being established, oftentimes these things don't stick. You really need to build that local buy-in and build the momentum within the community to have a community-led and supported approach. So if you can't bring your own solutions, what can you bring? What's very important is bringing that experience. It's not necessarily what you have done in terms of how you've set up a CERT, how you've set up a strategy, but really the why questions of why did you approach it this way? What did you learn? What went right and what went wrong? And then building that understanding of that local community in that context, taking that long-term approach where you're entrenching yourself with staying power within the local community, understanding what the needs really are and the different approaches that can take place. I'll jump into one example. Obviously, I don't want to point any fingers or anything like that, but in a previous role, we did quite a bit of work across the Asia Pacific developing incident response teams. And we had this great experience in one country in our region where a brand new incident response team, they're only about a year old, had some of the best training in the world. They had folks coming in from international organizations, folks who have done incident response projects elsewhere, folks who had established national CERTs that have been quite well did internationally. And they brought world-class training, world-class equipment, and world-class experience where they were on the ground for about a year. The challenge was, though, because it was such a siloed approach, while the folks within the CERT had that expertise, the lack of the connection with the community led to quite large challenges right from the start. There wasn't enough attention paid to how to build the relationships with the ISPs and the other network operators within the community. And it took quite a bit of time after the CERT was established to be able to start building that trust, because the CERT was established before the relationships were established. So it's quite important to take that local community view, build the solutions based on your experience and based on the context rather than predefined good practice.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, to me, always the capacity building activities have reminded a bit like a missionary job. You go there with a small Bible and you start lecturing how the other countries should do their job. I understood that this is not exactly the approach and this is not the most recommended approach. I mean, Matteo, I mean, maybe we can turn to you. I mean, what's your experience and how to do this missionary job in a way that your customers would be happy and there would be a change on the ground?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Greetings from Rome, in my home office. Yes, actually, much have been said already by the previous speakers, but I would bring here the experience we developed in Klée Plus, which is this global action that was also mentioned by Heli in the previous session, and it appears to be quite a successful experience, and we are thankful to the European Union for the big support that has been provided to the development of this initiative. Well, we say that capacity building has to be a voluntary action. So the first point is not to impose any timeline or any result, but is to approach countries sitting together and deciding together where we want to go and what we want to achieve. So to do this, one of the good practices that we established in Klée Plus is to appoint national teams that work with us. So when we do approach, when we do the first approach to a new country, we work with them to establish a national team of counterparts that can help us to, let's say, reach out to the right participants or to the right institutions that should contribute to our program. We have seen that this is a quite successful way of proceeding, because in this way the country has the ownership of what we are doing, and we just support a program that is decided by them, of course, in line with the goals of our project, so in line with what we can support. And Klée Plus has this big luck, I would say, to have a very clear mandate. And this is another point that is relevant, in my opinion. Having a very clear mandate helps in also defining what are the target groups that we are interfacing mostly, and having, let's say, helps in having a methodology to approach these target groups. Klée Plus, as it was mentioned before, focuses on cybercrime. So capacity building on cybercrime by our mandate, and this is also why Council of Europe is involved, is mostly based on the Budapest Convention and on the promotion of values that are enshrined in the Budapest Convention. So human rights, but also an effective action to ensure that the rule of law applies. This means that our main targets and our main counterparts are criminal justice authorities. So judges, magistrates, prosecutors, law enforcement, and of course policymakers. When it comes to policymakers and to legislators, we refer, of course, to cybercrime policies and to cybercrime legislation. So the mandate is pretty clear. Also, the lack of Klée Plus is that on these topics there is a huge interest on the global level. Many countries in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, and Central America are in the process of revising or drafting from scratch their own legislation. So they need assistance from the very beginning, so from drafting the legislation up to how to apply that legislation and up to how to create capacities to enforce that legislation. So in this respect, we are receiving on a continuous basis requests for assistance. So, so this is something that let's say helps a lot, because we have a strong commitment from the very beginning from local institutions. It's something that they request, and then we go and support. To grant. Okay.
Sorry for intervening. I mean, I exactly wanted to come back to this issue a bit later as well. In parallel, I mean, I understand that we have a like-minded coalition here sitting in a panel, but we just wanted to check also what our audience and viewers are thinking about the capacity building recipes for success, and then what are the key elements there. So just to let you all know that behind the scenes you can also attend on a poll. There is a question linked to the current panel in the conference website, and the question is that what is the recipe to success of a cyber capacity building project, with some options as well. And let's see in the end of the panel whether we have a similar thinking with all the panelists here. But I mean, now coming back to you, Liina, just wanted to ask, you mentioned that you have to offer a proper expertise and to ensure that the right people will be presenting the things which are expected. I mean, we briefly discussed that it is relevant to understand what are the expectations, but I mean, meeting the expectations, I mean, in practice, what is the ideal expert for this capacity building mission?
Ideal experts, when we are talking about cyber resilience, then ideal experts should be resilient, first and foremost, adaptable and flexible, and really know very broadly about the topic. Because you have to sometimes, at a very short notice, reformulate what you are going to present, because sometimes you are there on site and discover that the audience to whom you're prepared to deliver a rather specific and technical course are not fit to receive that, and they should not be, because they are maybe lawyers or policymakers. So you have to rethink and reformulate what you are preaching. It would be also extremely good if an expert would have some practical knowledge of working in public sector, because the primary recipients, or through whom we deliver capacity building, are local public agencies. And you cannot really deliver serious, honest stories if you haven't gone through the pain and sorrow and misery and infighting between different public agencies, who should be on the lead, who gets the people, who gets the resources, and explaining this relatively complicated technical topic to those who allocate the resources. So that experience creates content for days and days of capacity building, sharing your own personal story with those who are developing their national cybersecurity strategy or implementing that. Also, cyber experts are a little bit like lawyers or doctors, that they are expected, everybody expects that they know everything about their topic, or at least have an opinion about that. So a perfect capacity builder is like a superhero. They should know about the latest technical achievements, attack vectors, if possible, simulate a cyber attack on the spot, also know about law, economics, international relations, communications, etc. But if we would have such a cyber expert or capacity builder, we would probably not be able to hire that person, because that person is already full-time employed or double or triple-time employed, and would not have a spare hour to deliver trainings. So this is where a network kicks in, because if I don't know the answer to your very interesting question, I might know the person who knows the answer, or I might know somebody who knows somebody who has the answer to that question. So I think CyberNet has a real opportunity here to be the amplifier of such an expert network, and to deliver or produce some sort of structure to this inherently or currently quite loose and chaotic expert community.
Okay, I mean, Matteo, just from practical point of view, where do you find these experts? I mean, these superhuman-like creatures who knows absolutely everything about international relations, about communications, and also technology. I mean, how do you map this? And I mean, is there some sort of a recipe for that, or how do you start the project?
Well, in our project we have, I would say, two categories of experts. International experts, which are these kind of superheroes that were mentioned before. And then we are trying to grow as wide as possible a network of regional and national experts. And these are those experts that are trained under our project, and then, let's say, are available, give availability to be trainers themselves. Just today, we are closing a training in Ghana that is fully delivered by Ghanaian trainers, and we are just there supporting them on a few questions if it's needed, but at the moment it was not needed either. We have to keep into account that when it comes to delivery at national level, it is very much welcome to have someone with local experience. So we have to make effort to create a national network in different parts of the world. And in this, we committed this class. Of course, there is. Can you hear me? The video froze for a second.
No, we can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Of course, there is.
Sorry, I mean, I follow up to Klée perhaps from here. With Klée, just wanted to ask, I mean, about your experience of becoming a storyteller. I understand that this is a very important part of being a good missionary and being a good capacity building officer, that you, besides the fact that you have a technical know-how and knowledge, I mean, that you also are willing to talk about it. Because what I faced from the practice on the ground working in the IT agency was the fact that we had very talented people, but they didn't really want to share this in a wider audience. I mean, not all of them, but I mean, very good technicians in some occasions don't want to be the storytellers or would like to operate behind the scenes. I mean, what happened to you? I mean, how did you become a good storyteller?
Well, I'm still working on it. It's definitely something that requires practice. But really the key is to find people with passion. That's the team and that's the network that you can really draw on. Folks with that depth of experience, but also the passion to actually want to share that information. It can be very sensitive. It can be very difficult to create the right environment where folks are willing to share, both on the international stage, but also on the local stage. But what we've been able to do is reach out and build that network, similar to what everyone else has been sharing. to draw on those superheroes who do have full-time jobs, but you can bring in at the right times to swoop in and save the day, perhaps. One thing that we've been doing in the Pacific, we have a network called the Pacific Cybersecurity Operational Network. It's a point of contact network for instant response across the Pacific. And obviously we can't get together these days, so we started a remote session series. And what we've really done there is we've tried to bring in the best experts with the passion to share and with the experience to share, and try to connect them and take advantage of their expertise and what little time they're able to share. So we were able to reach out to folks like my CERT to share some of the incident response experience that they've had. Experts at APNIC who are able to share their experience building CERTs in the region. Experts from KR CERT to organize a training, week-long training to introduce incident response as well. So it's really about finding the folks who have that experience and taking as much as you can from them, really. The incident response community is incredibly open and incredibly willing to share. While folks might not have the time, there are those opportunities to glean little nuggets of gold. And that's from the international perspective, but also domestically, there is a rich community of folks with incredible experience running networks, being the jack of all trades, because such small teams with limited resources really need to be able to make the most out of a little. So don't lose sight of that local community and encouraging a local community, local network operating groups, local IT communities to develop and share their own stories with each other. And one great story about how to make that happen is just last week, Mongolia NOG held their second meeting. Of course, it was a remote meeting, but this is a network operators group that was started over some hurshor, which is a nice little pastry, and beer. Mongolia is quite a competitive environment for IT. So the network operators in that community weren't necessarily communicating across companies all that much, even though they had rich stories to share. And sometimes all it takes is bringing folks into a room together. They might be shy to start, but if you create that right comfortable environment and folks just start talking shop, people will open up. So it's really that human element to networking and community building that's key to building that information sharing and storytelling space.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think exactly this is something what the EU CyberNet is aiming at as well. I mean, building this network of I mean, experts who would be willing to work together, who would have different profiles and who would match the needs of our partners in third countries. But Liina, asking from you, there are many actors, I mean, and there are many networks internationally doing very similar tasks. And do you feel on the ground, if you go on a mission, that you are in a competition with some other folks from other entities, like conducting the same capacity building initiatives and trying to achieve the same? Or this is not yet the case?
I think we are always on a competition, but it's a very healthy competition. I think I have had only positive experiences representing an EU project, because EU is largely respected as a responsible implementer who has vast joint knowledge to share. So it's not a small boutique who appears today and is gone tomorrow. So I think I'm representing the right project. But I think I'm allowed to say that here. But of course there is competition, but competition is a driving force. But we still should have the ultimate aim in mind when we deliver capacity building, that who are we delivering it for, and we should have that always in mind, that what we need to see is that we need to see tangible progress and change, and this only happens if we do that together, thinking of the recipient and not of how to how to, or not to be egoistic as a project in that sense that we are not talking to anybody or not sharing and collaborating with anybody. And what was mentioned here before, that it's very important to develop the local capacity to share within the region and elsewhere, because we want in one at one time in the future for those who are receiving the trainings to be the trainees. And here I should remove my modest Estonian hat and say that 20 years ago we were at the receiving end of capacity building, and now we are at the forefront of cyber capacity building, at least. And this is what we should, all projects, we should strive to achieve that. And networking is very important as well to help these entities or these teams in recipient countries to develop a good and practical working relationship with teams in our own countries, in donor countries, and if possible, to develop a more sustainable exchange schemes, professional internships, mentoring schemes, and this is kind of a longer-term approach that we should have in mind, and a single project do not have the resources to deliver everything. That's certain. So we should build on top of each other's experiences, capacities to deliver, and do that in a strategic way with an objective of helping the country that has requested this assistance.
Yes, I think you touched upon a very good memory. I think we both share about this 20 years ago when different experts from different EU countries at that time were coming to Tallinn, regulations in hand, and providing some lectures and capacity building measures. And I have to say that my feeling at that time was that the most successful ones were the ones who really managed to also pay attention to the local circumstances and build this kind of personal interaction and bridges. But I think it's more or less the same what the EU CyberNet is aiming here. But Matteo, Klée, I wanted to ask from you, I mean, if you go to a country X and you are tasked to conduct a capacity building project there, where do you start? Do you do some mapping? Do you consult with your network? I understand that this network is a bit informal network where you know the people around and you check the country-specific requirements, or it's a project where, I mean, simply you will be delivering what is asked from the recipient country?
Yeah, it's a challenging place to start because the natural inclination would be to do a scoping exercise. But I can definitely speak for the Pacific, but probably for most of the world. Folks are quite tired of being scoped, and the challenge is every project is going to start with a scoping, but there's so little information sharing across projects that oftentimes people are being asked the same question over and over again. So the first place to start is to reach out, again, to your network. It's obviously a theme here in terms of folks' approaches. Reach out to other people who have implemented projects in a country, but also to folks within the country who you know, to understand what has worked and what hasn't. And that's really where you can get a good idea of what's happening on the ground, where the needs actually are, and what are some of the skill sets and some of the folks that you want to bring with you, because each location is going to have a little bit of a different challenge that they're facing. Then you kind of have to jump in. You have a little bit of information. You're never going to have everything. But the best thing to do, which is obviously challenging now, you can do it over Zoom, but that's the best thing to do is to get on the ground and talk to folks. That's how you can understand what's happening at the network level with people whose hands are on the networks, who are building the systems, building the structures, building the policies even, if we want to talk on the policy side, and get a really visceral idea of what concerns them day to day. Take off the solution hat, take off the model that you come from, and just try to understand what concerns them, what challenges are they trying to fix, and understand what resources are available. And from there, you really need to build a local coalition that's multi-stakeholder, that can come together and build something. It's very, very infrequent that the government alone can fix a problem, or one ministry within the government can fix a problem, or ISPs or the private sector alone can fix a problem, or civil society or the technical community can alone fix a problem. So you need to find stakeholders from across a society, across a community, to come together and understand all angles of the challenge, and all the different possible solutions. One great example of what has worked quite well, it's actually CERT NZ's older sibling, a year older than us, is CERT Tonga. And when they were getting started, the first thing folks did was they came together in a room. It was all the relevant ministries, the ministries of communication, the police, the Attorney General's office, alongside civil society, all the ISPs in the community, as well as some other interested actors and key stakeholders. And they came together to discuss, first, what is a CERT? What kind of challenges could it address within the society, and together built a terms of reference and a mandate. And from there, a roadmap could be created to determine what does a CERT look like within the context of Tonga. It was all about building on the exact need, starting with a small approach. You can't fit a country of 10 million or 100 million or 300 million, their model of a CERT, onto a country of just a couple tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. So starting small with quick wins, and then building a plan to scale as need and capacity grows. And that involves building on that network and drawing from, again, all the different angles within society. So it's really important to take that holistic perspective, even if your solution might be a small technical issue,
Yeah.
or if it's something as big as a policy or strategy.
Yes, and I think the example that you brought about CERT is very good. I mean, in some countries it's completely private entity. In some countries it's linked to the universities. In some countries it's part of a public institution than in Estonia. But coming back to you, Matteo, I wanted to ask. I mean. In a previous panel, we were discussing the sustainability and the fact that how we can really ensure impact on the ground, and how to ensure that the project will have long-lasting results. What is your experience? What needs to be done? I mean, what are the success factors there in order to make a change on the ground and to have it sustainable? Because I mentioned it earlier as well. I mean, as one of my Dutch colleagues mentioned once, then they have been to several countries helping to build up different CERTs. And in the end of the day, once they have returned there, they see that they have to start from scratch because the people have already went on to private sector because they have been so well trained and so on. Have you felt the same? And I mean, how do you see that the sustainability could be ensured?
Yeah. Actually, this is a very important point because capacity building programs have to be a trigger in the country to make sure that the process is what remains, not just the training. So what we do is usually we work with local training institutions, and we don't only try to create a pool of national trainers like we did in all our priority countries, but also we are working on the strategic level. So we work with them in a way that a strategy for training judiciary or law enforcement is adopted. And when it is adopted, this means that there is a commitment to allocate resources and to make sure that the competencies that have been built with a capacity building initiative are then maintained and kept and developed through local resources. So this is a very important step that we do, and our program, let's say, has a methodology that gets up to the point of embedding in the strategies of the country modules on cybercrime, training on electronic evidence, and this is kept and maintained by local resources. So sustainability is obtained through commitment, of course, of local institutions, through working at, let's say, a slightly higher level at the decision making level, so that the capacity building is streamlined in the strategy of the country. And this is reflected then either in the national cybersecurity strategy or in the national cybercrime strategy or in national training strategies. But anyway, a commitment from high-level authorities is taken.
Okay, thanks for that. I just wanted to draw your attention now to the results of the poll that was running behind the scenes at the time when we were discussing. Basically, we were asking more or less the same question as from the panelists. I mean, what is the critical success factors for any capacity building project, and a kind of a recipe to success. And again, I have to say that all the different elements that were mentioned by and are highlighted by EU CyberNet on their mission are very clearly indicated here as well. I mean, as I can see, the local ownership is considered as one of the most relevant success factors. And also, next to that, more or less in an equal footing, is the right expertise and partners. Both is something where the EU CyberNet is putting a lot of emphasis. I think the cyber experts pool that we will be discussing later will be supporting the network and the expertise side, and the local ownership is something that probably will be facilitated by country-specific profiles, and also building these local expert networks there, and keeping and maintaining the data about it. But this is the way our audience is looking the question. So now I would turn to the audience here on spot and ask whether there is perhaps one question or two for the panel, and then we can maybe conclude with the final remarks. I see a gentleman there asking for.
So good afternoon, and thank you for the great remarks from the panelists. My name's Commander Michael Woodman. I work at the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence. My organization has been part of an effort led by the ITU to develop a guide to establishing national cybersecurity strategies. I believe to date, around half the nations of the world have a national cybersecurity strategy. We're engaging with ITU again to develop a second iteration of that guide. So my question is, of the nations who haven't established a national cybersecurity strategy, how would you suggest engaging those nations? And what do you see the EU's role is in engaging those nations? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for this question. And I would basically say that, I mean, this is a question to all the panelists, and I would complement it with a bit of concluding question as well. I mean, keeping in mind the question about the cybersecurity strategies and the EU and the possible role that EU CyberNet could play, perhaps you could very briefly highlight also your 2 or 3 expectations to EU CyberNet. How do you see this in the future, and what would you expect? And whether also the question from the gentleman from NATO Cybersecurity Center of Excellence on the strategies and developing the strategy in third countries could be addressed by EU Cybersecurity Network, so or EU CyberNet. So starting with Liina.
Thank you very much for the question. Indeed, the guide that you mentioned is a very valuable resource, because it brings together the expertise from different organizations that have delivered cybersecurity strategies, capacity building in different countries, and we always recommend that as a source if a nation is planning to design or a strategy, or is implementing a strategy. And I think the knowledge about the necessity to have a cybersecurity strategy is spreading very rapidly. And these different indexes and measuring and comparisons and maturity comparisons between the different countries are also driving that knowledge, because countries want to have a better score in a ITU index or some other maturity assessment tables. And by having a cybersecurity strategy, you already leap a big step forward in the index, and this is promoting definitely the knowledge that this is where you should start when you're developing your cybersecurity maturity. Regarding expectations to CyberNet, to put it very simply, assess what is needed, assess what capacity is existing and fill the gaps, and train the experts to improve their trainer or professional training qualifications, because as Uku mentioned also, we all know these top experts who are too shy to speak about their work or afraid to speak in front of large audiences, or are just simply not interested. So CyberNet might want to develop some innovative, appealing motivators that would make being part of the CyberNet experts pool as the gang to belong to. So I think that would be your first challenge to attract these top experts that are not interested or don't feel confident to join your pool. And to go back to where we started, is that what makes a successful project is not a project that is having a lot of funds to deliver, but a project that is well networked. And apart from, again, expectation for CyberNet, apart from finding the right experts to all EU cyber capacity building projects, I hope that you can also stitch together the EU cyber capacity building scene, and to be able to present yourself as a facilitator and an expertise and knowledge hub for all EU-wide capacity building projects.
Thanks very elegantly, but I have to say very brief comments also from gentlemen from online. I mean, Klée, perhaps you can say, I mean, as from not from Europe, I mean, what would be your expectations to EU CyberNet?
Well, I think I'm quite excited that the EU CyberNet is taking a network approach. It's something that we've seen to be quite successful in our region. And I guess the expectation is not only to really double down on that network approach, but as folks have been saying the importance of information sharing across that network, take it to the extreme. Extreme information sharing is how we're going to be able to succeed. And that means not only sharing information of projects that you're doing, but sharing information before the project has been developed. And that way you can collaborate on its actual delivery rather than sharing too late when it's just more of a heads up kind of exercise. And it really involves not only sharing what works, but being bold enough and brave enough to share what doesn't work. Because 90% of the time you learn a lot more from what doesn't work than what does. So that extreme cyber capacity building sharing, if EU CyberNet can inspire folks to do that, that would be excellent. And again, with the network approach, if you can apply that also at the local level, so you can create a network within Europe, within delivery folks, within implementers, but also apply that locally to build a local network of expertise on the ground, of folks who are passionate about a project, folks from different stakeholder groups, so they can work together locally, even if a project ends, even if funding is over. That local NOG, or that local cybersecurity community, or that local educational or training network can still exist and thrive and become a self-perpetuating kind of community. Just one point very, very quickly on the strategy point, and it really comes to taking that local perspective, is the first question you need to ask is, what are you trying to achieve by developing a national cybersecurity strategy? It is a very important piece to many folks' approach to cybersecurity, but it shouldn't necessarily be an end in and of itself. And for some countries, a cyber strategy isn't necessarily what is needed immediately. It might be something that's needed further down the road. In the Pacific, we've seen a lot of examples of efforts to create national cybersecurity strategies, but it wasn't necessarily done in a way that brought the community along. So you have this really great document that's created, but because the local buy-in isn't there, and the local community to help deploy it hasn't been engaged or inspired by it, oftentimes it stays as a nice document on a shelf. So it's really important to, again, take that local perspective, build that local community, build that local network, and work hand in hand to develop each other's cyber capacity.
Thank you, Klée. Before I turn to you, Matteo, for your final remarks, I mean, I understood that there is one question from the audience as well. So please state your name and position, and the floor is yours.
Hello, Marko Künnapuu, Ministry of Justice of Estonia. I have a question to the panelists that, as you have been working with different countries, then do you have a recipe how to involve policymakers and legislators in the best manner? Because it is often the case that you go to different countries, you deliver practical trainings, workshops, but you wouldn't have this change or impact you expected at the first place, because policymakers and legislators will not go on, and necessary amendments to policies or legislation are not being followed.
Yes, thank you. Very valid question, I think. And Matteo, if you could maybe briefly say a few words on that, and maybe sum up your expectations to EU CyberNet as well in this context.
Yeah. Well, about this question from Marco, and hi, Marco. The involvement of policymakers, of course, is a process that requires time, requires commitment, requires a lot of effort, and also requires also the possibility to fail. There are some countries where we couldn't reach out to the policymakers, or when we reached out to the policymakers, we understood that they had political issues to proceed on the ways we were suggesting. So we had to give up. While instead in many other countries, this is not the situation. So there has to be, let's say, a work that comes from down, in a bottom up approach from the practitioners level to reach out to the policymakers, but has to be also a work that comes from the diplomacy level, and that gets a bit more on the top-down approach. And when these two meet, then you reach out to the right level of policymakers that can make a change in the country. So when it comes to the expectations for CyberNet, well, it has been said already. I fully agree with what Klée was saying and with what Liina was saying about the need to have both international experts that can provide the vision and the competencies that are needed to put the basis in the country. But then we also have to take care of developing local communities of experts, of enthusiasts of these topics, because those are the ones that then will be championing these initiatives in their own country. So this is very important. And CyberNet, well, CyberNet has to work in a way that it becomes the point where the demand and the offer meet. It has not just to be a reference network for us projects, when seeking for experts, but also for experts, they have to know that there is this network, and this is the network of reference that they should be part of to develop their own activities. So this is an ambitious goal, but some mechanisms have to be found to become a reference point, to ensure that experts that are in the network are available for projects, their competencies is somehow certified and maintained, so that they also have an incentive to be in the network. Last point about the National Cybersecurity Guide, because also actually I am participating in the same working group that was mentioned by the colleague from the NATO Cybersecurity Competence Center. This is indeed a very valid tool, and I'm very happy that for this second edition there has been further enlargement and further extension of the group of developers, thus including also aspects related to legislation on cybercrime, which was not fully there in the first edition. So this gets back to to what I was saying before, that cybercrime has to be tackled at policy level and has to be there when policies are drafted in each country. So
thank you, Matteo, for that. I mean, thank you for summing up the panel very elegantly. I understood that this was a like-minded coalition here. So just key takeaways. Please do pay attention to the local communities and their needs. Build up a proper network of experts, have a solid understanding of the expectations, and build bridges with the political stakeholders. And I think this is something that EU CyberNet is addressing in its entirety, and that's exactly part of its mission. So I would really like to thank you all for this session. I mean, Liina, Klée, and Matteo, thank you very much for being with us, and we will continue in a moment.